The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs, a restless energy filling the packed gallery. This wasn't some routine hearing. It had the air of a high-profile trial, though no one could quite explain why. At the center of it all stood a young black girl, maybe 17 at most, her sneakers barely making a sound as she shifted on the polished floor. She didn't fidget, didn't flinch. If she was nervous, it didn't show. Judge Franklin Westbrook adjusted his glasses, his heavy frame sinking deeper into the worn leather chair. He regarded her with barely disguised skepticism. "Miss Carter," he said, dragging out the name like it was an inconvenience, "do you even understand what you're being accused of here?" The room fell silent. All eyes darted between the judge and the girl. She met his gaze, calm, steady. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The judge scoffed. "You sure about that?" "Because this isn't some after-school debate club. This is a court of law, young lady." A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. She let them laugh. She let them stare. But there was something in her expression, something quiet yet unshakable, that made people hesitate. Judge Westbrook exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know who thought it was a good idea to let you represent yourself, but this isn't child's play. You are not equipped for this." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. The judge took her silence as surrender. What he and everyone else in that room failed to realize was that she wasn't some scared teenager caught in the system. She was here for a reason, and by the end of this hearing, they would all know why. Have you made it this far? Then comment, "I'm still here, so I know you're watching." The judge tapped his pen against the bench, the sharp rhythm cutting through the hushed whispers. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, flipping through the file. "The prosecution may proceed." The district attorney, a tall man with slicked back hair and a practiced smirk, rose from his chair. His name was Adam Hensley, and he carried himself like someone who had never lost a case. "Your Honor, this is an open and shut case," he began, pacing in front of the jury box like he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. "The evidence speaks for itself. The defendant, a minor, was found at the scene, in possession of materials that clearly link her to—" "Objection!" The girl's voice cut through the air like a blade. A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. Hensley froze mid-sentence, his smirk slipping for the first time. Judge Westbrook raised an eyebrow. "Objection?" he repeated, his tone thick with sarcasm. "Miss Carter, do you even know what that means?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said unfazed. "The prosecutor is making assumptions about my intent without providing context. That's speculative and inadmissible." A stunned silence filled the room. Hensley's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "No," she countered, her voice even. "What's irregular is the prosecution's reliance on circumstantial evidence without proper substantiation." The judge's gavel slammed down. "That's enough," he snapped, his face darkening. "Miss Carter, you are here to defend yourself, not to play lawyer. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." "Understood, Your Honor," she replied, her expression unreadable. Hensley cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "As I was saying—" "Permission to approach the bench," she interrupted. A gasp spread through the courtroom. Judge Westbrook leaned forward, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. "You don't get to make demands in my courtroom." "I'm not making a demand, Your Honor. I'm exercising my right to present a fair defense," she said evenly. "But if you refuse to hear me out, I'll have no choice but to file a motion for recusal on the grounds of judicial bias." The murmurs swelled again. The judge stared at her, his fingers tightening around his gavel. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Then finally he leaned back in his chair. "Fine. Approach." She stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Every eye in the room followed her. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her, but she carried it with ease. Reaching the bench, she placed a neatly organized stack of papers in front of the judge and slid them forward. "This," she said, "is a preliminary review of the prosecution's evidence." Judge Westbrook's frown deepened as he skimmed the pages. Hensley's eyes flickered to the documents, suspicion creeping across his face. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She can," the judge muttered, cutting him off. He flipped through a few more pages, his brows knitting together. "Where did you get this?" "I prepared it," she said simply. Westbrook glanced up. And how exactly does a 17-year-old know how to put together something like this? She hesitated for just a beat. Then with a faint, knowing smile, she said, I read. The room was dead silent. The judge studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. The DA, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. This is ridiculous, Hensley sputtered. Your Honor, she's a child. This isn't a debate club. Judge Westbrook held up a hand, silencing him. His gaze never left the girl. Who are you, really? She met his stare without blinking. I'm someone who understands the law better than most people in this room. The murmurs returned, louder this time. People leaned in, whispering theories. Enough games, the judge snapped, though his voice had lost some of its earlier condescension. What's your point, Miss Carter? She took a step back, but her confidence never wavered. My point, she said, her voice clear and unwavering, is that I'm not just a teenager standing trial. I'm an attorney. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, a few outright exclamations of disbelief. Hensley slammed his hand on the table. Your Honor, this is absurd. She's clearly lying. I'm not, she shot back, her tone sharper now. I passed the California bar exam last year. You can look me up. Naomi Carter, licensed attorney. The judge's face paled. He turned to the court clerk. Verify that. The room held its breath. The only sound was the furious clatter of the clerk's keyboard. Seconds stretched into eternity. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, the clerk looked up, her eyes wide. It's true, she whispered. Naomi Carter is a registered attorney with the State Bar of California. The courtroom exploded once more. Judge Westbrook slammed his gavel down. Order! His voice was commanding, but even he looked rattled. He turned back to Naomi, his fingers gripping the edge of the bench. You're telling me, he said, his voice unsteady, that you're a licensed attorney at 17? Yes, Your Honor, she answered, steady as ever. I graduated high school early, earned my degree, and passed the bar exam. And now I'm here. The DA sputtered, his face burning red. This is highly irregular. She shouldn't even be allowed to. She's allowed, the judge interrupted, his tone quieter now, almost introspective. He sat back staring at her like she was an unsolvable equation. Naomi tilted her head slightly, that faint, knowing smile returning. You underestimated me, Your Honor, she said. A lot of people in this room did. But I'm not here to play games. I'm here to win. The gallery was still buzzing, whispers swirling like a storm. But as the realization settled, so did a new question. If she was truly an attorney, then what else had they misjudged? And how was she about to turn this case on its head? The courtroom was a storm of murmurs, disbelief rippling through the gallery like a shockwave. Naomi Carter, 17 years old, standing there in sneakers and a hoodie, had just declared herself a licensed attorney, and the court clerk had confirmed it. Judge Westbrook exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming against the bench. His eyes never left Naomi, studying her like a puzzle missing too many pieces. You're telling me, he said, his voice quieter now, that you passed the California bar exam? Yes, Your Honor, Naomi answered. I graduated high school early, earned my degree, and passed the bar last year. The disbelief in the room was almost tangible. Hensley, the DA, let out a sharp, bitter laugh. This is ridiculous. Your Honor, you can't seriously entertain this. She's a child. The judge didn't look at him. His focus was still locked on Naomi. Miss Carter, he said, his tone more measured than before. I need to understand exactly what's going on here. You are legally licensed to practice law in the state of California? That's correct, Your Honor. Westbrook turned to the clerk again. Pull up her credentials. I want to see them myself. The clerk nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. The room was eerily silent, everyone holding their breath. Hensley folded his arms, shaking his head. This is absurd. She's bluffing. The clerk stopped typing. I have her record, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Naomi Carter, licensed attorney, admitted to the California bar at 16. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Even the judge, for all his skepticism, looked momentarily rattled. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just stood there, composed as ever. Hensley's frustration boiled over. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. She shouldn't even be allowed to. She's allowed, Westbrook interrupted, though his voice lacked its usual sternness. He sat back, rubbing his jaw, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Naomi tilted her head slightly. You underestimated me, Your Honor. A lot of people in this room did, but I'm not here to prove something to you. Then what are you here for? Westbrook asked. Naomi took a deep breath. To defend myself, properly, and to remind this courtroom that the justice system isn't about power plays. It's about the truth. For the first time that morning, the judge didn't have an immediate retort, but Hensley wasn't done. This is a stunt, he snapped. She's trying to derail these proceedings, and frankly, Your Honor, I won't stand for it. Naomi didn't even look at him. Instead, she turned to the judge. Then let's put it to the test, she said. Let's go through the evidence piece by piece, and you tell me if this case still holds up. Westbrook studied her for a long moment. Then with a slow nod, he gestured for her to proceed. Naomi walked back to her table, picking up a neatly organized file. First, she said, flipping to the first page, we need to address the prosecution's reliance on circumstantial evidence. Take Exhibit B, for example, the surveillance footage. The DA claims this places me at the scene, but there's one glaring issue. She paused, waiting. Hensley rolled his eyes. The footage clearly shows you near the location of the crime. What issue? Naomi turned a page and held up a document. The timestamp. It's missing. And on top of that, the footage was retrieved from an unverified source, which violates the chain of custody. Without proper authentication, this evidence should be deemed inadmissible. The judge turned to Hensley. Is this true? Hensley hesitated, his mouth opening and closing. Well, the judge prompted. The footage is reliable, Hensley insisted. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Is it? She asked. Because I have a forensic analyst report here, outlining all the inconsistencies in the file. Would you like me to submit it to the court? She was relentless. Every word calm, measured, like she had done this 100 times before. Westbrook gestured for the document. Naomi handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. The judge skimmed it, his expression darkening with each passing second. This raises serious questions, he muttered. Hensley looked like he wanted to disappear. Your Honor, this is just a tactic to derail the case. Naomi didn't blink. It's called due process, something the prosecution seems to have overlooked. A murmur of approval spread through the gallery. Naomi could feel the energy in the room shifting. People were starting to believe her, starting to root for her, but she wasn't done. Next, she continued, flipping through another section of her file. Let's discuss Exhibit D, the so-called confession. Hensley's face hardened. The defendant signed a statement admitting, under duress, Naomi interrupted, after hours of interrogation, without legal representation present. Under federal law, that's a clear violation of my rights. You didn't request counsel, Hensley shot back. I didn't have to, she replied, her voice unwavering. Minors are entitled to legal representation, period. That's the law. But let's put that aside for a moment. Even if we were to entertain this so-called confession, it's riddled with inaccuracies. For example, the address listed in the statement. It's wrong. I've never lived there. That's public record. The judge turned to Hensley. Do you have an explanation for this? Hensley flipped through his papers as though the answers might magically appear. You don't, Naomi finished for him, because you didn't do your homework. You assumed this case would be an easy win. You assumed I wouldn't fight back. But here we are. The judge held up a hand, silencing them both. He leaned back, rubbing his temple. Miss Carter, he said slowly, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? Naomi straightened, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. I'm trying to show this court that the justice system isn't about winning or losing, she said. It's about truth. And the truth is, this case is built on shaky evidence and even shakier assumptions. The gallery was silent, every eye locked on her. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned, as though he wasn't sure how to respond. But the real question now was, could she convince him to rule in her favor? The silence in the courtroom was deafening, the weight of Naomi's words pressing down on everyone. Judge Westbrook leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the bench. He was no longer just presiding over the case. He was studying her, trying to make sense of the legal prodigy standing before him. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice more measured now, "you've certainly raised valid concerns, but legal theatrics won't save you. The prosecution still claims to have strong evidence." Naomi nodded, completely unfazed. "Then let's address that." She turned back to the defense table, picked up another document, and walked to the center of the room. "Let's talk about Exhibit E, the prosecution's so-called key witness. Mr. Hensley, would you care to remind the court of their statement?" Hensley, still visibly rattled, cleared his throat. "The witness, a store clerk, identified you as the person leaving the scene." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Identified me?" She pulled out a transcript. "Or did they identify someone wearing a dark hoodie?" Hensley's jaw tightened. Naomi flipped through the document. "Your Honor, the witness never once confirmed my identity by name. Their statement, and I quote, says, 'I think it was a young girl, probably black, wearing a dark hoodie.' That's not an identification. That's an assumption." Westbrook turned to Hensley. "Is that accurate?" Hensley hesitated before muttering, "Technically?" "Technically?" Naomi repeated, her voice sharp. "You built a case around a technically? That's not evidence. That's profiling." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Naomi could feel it, the shift in the room. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was making people question the very foundation of the case against her. Judge Westbrook adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hensley, without a confirmed identification, this witness testimony is weak at best. Do you have anything more concrete?" Hensley clenched his jaw. "Your Honor, the evidence still overwhelmingly ignores due process," Naomi interrupted. Hensley spun toward her. "You don't get to dictate how this trial runs." "I don't have to," Naomi shot back. "The law does." The judge's gavel struck the bench. "Enough," he commanded, though his gaze remained locked on Hensley. Naomi took a deep breath and turned to face the jury. "Let's be clear about what's happening here. The prosecution wants you to believe I'm guilty because of weak circumstantial evidence, an unverified witness statement, and a confession obtained illegally. Not one piece of this case holds up under scrutiny. So I ask you, what exactly is left?" The jurors glanced at one another. A few shifted uncomfortably. Naomi wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, turning back to Westbrook, "I move to have Exhibit E, the witness testimony, stricken from the record due to its unreliable and prejudicial nature." Westbrook studied her, then exhaled. "Motion granted." Hensley's frustration boiled over. "Your Honor, enough," the judge said again, his patience wearing thin. "You should have ensured your witness provided a credible statement. That's on you." Naomi allowed herself the smallest breath of relief, but she knew the fight wasn't over. She stepped toward the prosecution's table. "That brings us to Exhibit B, the surveillance footage, the cornerstone of the prosecution's case." Hensley's smirk returned. "Yes, let's. The footage places you at the scene. That's indisputable." Naomi gave him a look of pure confidence. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Westbrook sighed but nodded. "Proceed." She walked up and placed another document in front of him. "This is a forensic analysis of the footage. If you review page 3, you'll see that the timestamp is missing and metadata shows the file was altered." Westbrook flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Hensley paled. "That's irrelevant." "It's entirely relevant," Naomi interrupted. "Without a verifiable chain of custody, this footage is useless. In fact, admitting it as evidence would be a violation of my constitutional rights." The judge leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "Mr. Hensley, do you have a rebuttal?" Hensley was gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to—" "To what?" Naomi interjected. "To prevent you from presenting manipulated evidence? You had one job, Mr. Hensley, to build a case based on facts. And instead, you've presented half-truths and procedural violations." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Westbrook tapped his gavel once. Enough, he said, but his tone lacked its earlier certainty. He exhaled, then looked at the prosecution. Without a timestamp and proper authentication, I have no choice but to rule Exhibit B inadmissible. Naomi saw it then. The moment it hit Hensley, he had lost control of the case. She stepped back, letting the weight of the moment settle. The judge turned to the DA. Mr. Hensley, I want to be very clear. This is the second major issue with your case today. Do you have anything left that is solid enough to proceed? Hensley was silent. Naomi crossed her arms. I think we both know the answer. Westbrook let out a heavy sigh and glanced at the clock. Then after a long pause, he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Hensley. The prosecution has failed to provide sufficient, admissible evidence to justify moving forward with this case, he said slowly. The words carried through the courtroom like a shockwave. I have no choice but to dismiss all charges against Naomi Carter, effective immediately. The room erupted. Some gasped, some whispered furiously, and others, even those who had doubted her, nodded in quiet admiration. Hensley looked like he wanted to disappear. Naomi let out a slow breath, then straightened her posture. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply turned to Judge Westbrook and gave a respectful nod. Thank you, Your Honor. He studied her for a moment before nodding back. Miss Carter, you've proven yourself today. She gathered her papers, her composure unwavering. As she stepped toward the exit, the crowd parted. Some watched her with disbelief, others with awe. Outside the courthouse, a reporter rushed toward her. Miss Carter, can you tell us how you pulled this off? What's your secret? Naomi stopped, turned to face the cameras, and with a calm, unwavering gaze said, There's no secret. The law is meant to serve everyone, not just those who fit a certain mold. People like me, young, black, underestimated, were capable of more than you think. Today wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about proving that intelligence and determination don't come with an age limit. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a courtroom and a system that would never see her the same way again. The courtroom was still buzzing, the shock of the judge's words rippling through the packed gallery. Naomi Carter had just dismantled the prosecution's case, piece by piece, and now the moment of truth had arrived. Judge Westbrook adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. Miss Carter, he said, his voice quieter than before, you've certainly given us all a lot to think about. Naomi stood tall, her hands resting lightly on the table in front of her. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She just waited, calm and composed, as if she already knew what was coming. The judge turned to the DA. Mr. Hensley, it's clear to me that there are significant issues with the evidence presented in this case. The chain of custody for Exhibit B is compromised. Exhibit D is inadmissible due to clear violations of the defendant's rights. And now Exhibit E, the witness testimony, has been proven unreliable. He exhaled heavily. I have no choice but to dismiss these charges. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped. Some whispered furiously to one another. A few people stormed out, clearly dissatisfied. Hensley shot to his feet. Your Honor, with all due respect, Westbrook interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. You should have done your job better. This is my courtroom, and I will not allow it to become a circus. Hensley sat down, jaw clenched, his face a deep shade of crimson. All eyes turned back to Naomi. Some looked at her with disbelief, others with admiration. A few even nodded in quiet approval, as if silently acknowledging what she had just accomplished. Westbrook leaned forward, his tone no longer carrying the condescension from earlier. Miss Carter, he said, I must admit, I misjudged you. I assumed you were just a kid out of her depth. I was wrong. Naomi let his words settle. Then with measured control, she replied, Thank you, Your Honor, but this was never about me. It's about the justice system, about holding prosecutors, judges, and attorneys to a higher standard. That's what justice should be. A beat of silence followed before Westbrook gave a slow nod. Well said. He glanced toward the court clerk. Dismissed. The gavel slammed down. The decision was final. Naomi Carter had not only won her case, she had reshaped the entire conversation around it. For a moment she stood there, letting it all wash over her. The tension, the weight, the disbelief, the triumph. Then with a small, respectful nod to the judge, she gathered her papers and turned toward the exit. As she walked down the aisle, the crowd parted. Their eyes followed her every step, some with lingering doubt, others with newfound respect. But Naomi didn't linger. She had nothing left to prove. The heavy double doors swung open, and she stepped into the sunlight. A cluster of reporters was already waiting. A microphone was shoved toward her. "Miss Carter, can you tell us how you managed to pull this off?" "What's your secret?" Naomi paused. She looked directly into the camera, unwavering. "There's no secret," she said. "The law is meant to serve everyone, not just those who fit a certain mold. People like me, young, black, underestimated, we're capable of more than you think. Today wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about proving that intelligence and determination don't come with an age limit." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a courtroom and a system that would never see her the same way again. Naomi Carter stepped away from the courthouse steps. The hum of reporters and spectators thickened the air. The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, it had grown. People craning their necks, murmuring, whispering theories. She had walked in as a defendant. She walked out as a force of nature. The questions came rapid fire. "Naomi, how did you stay so calm in court? Were you afraid they wouldn't believe you? What do you say to those who still doubt you?" Naomi stopped, glancing at the sea of cameras and expectant faces. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was ready. She took a step forward. "I wasn't calm because I had nothing to lose," she said. "I was calm because I knew the truth. The law isn't about power, it's about facts. And today the facts won." The reporters kept pushing, but Naomi held up a hand. "You want to know what today was really about?" she continued. "It wasn't about me proving I could pass the bar exam. It wasn't about catching the prosecution off guard. It was about something bigger." The crowd hushed, drawn in by the weight of her words. "It was about challenging the way people see power. It was about proving that knowledge, determination, and justice aren't reserved for people who look a certain way, talk a certain way, or fit into a certain mold. Intelligence doesn't have an age, and justice doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the truth." The cameras flashed, the crowd absorbing every word. Naomi took a breath. "People like me, young, black, underestimated, we're not waiting for permission to take up space. We're here. We've always been here. And today was just a reminder of that." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. A few clapped. Others simply nodded, understanding something deeper than words. One final question rang out from the back. "What's next for Naomi Carter?" She smiled slightly. "Today was just the beginning," she said. "Now let's see what happens next." Then without another word, she turned and walked away, her head high, her steps steady, leaving behind a courtroom and a world that would never see her the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching would realize that the limits they thought existed were never real to begin with. Naomi Carter proved that intelligence and determination have no limits. She changed the way people saw her, and maybe even the way they see the world. But this isn't just her story. It's a reminder that anyone can defy expectations and rewrite the rules. If this message resonated with you, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the way we think. What's the biggest misconception people have about you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation.